He came home without calling. The town car glided into the circular drive, the lake outside the floor-to-ceiling windows scattered with late afternoon light, and for once he wanted nothing to do with meetings or plans or the filtered world that lived inside his phone. He had an hour, he told himself, maybe two. He wanted to see the house as it was in the hush between executives and obligations. He wanted to see his twins. The housekeeper at the gate told him she thought everyone was downstairs. He did not expect to find the scene that stopped him on the landing. The nursery was a riot of crayons and paper, a small fortress of blankets and cardboard forts. A music box played something older than his playlists, the melody moving between the toys and the light like a secret. His daughter, the smaller of the two, sat cross-legged with a piece of yarn wrapped around her fingers, giggling. His son, taller by a head but still small enough to be held, was balanced against the maid like a human buoy, his legs swinging, his face bright with concentration. The maid, Elena, had been with the family for 2 years. She kept a precise ledger of laundry and dishware in her head. When she decided something needed doing, she did it quietly and without fuss. He had seen her in the kitchen, in the greenhouse, leaving with a shopping bag when the children were at school. He knew her name, but he did not know the color of the thread she carried in her work apron or the way she bent when she hummed to a child who would not sleep. The billionaire stood at the doorway like a man caught out between worlds. For a long moment no one noticed him. The twins were entirely absorbed. His daughter was decorating a cardboard crown with sequins, insisting the crown needed a star so it would fly when she waved it. His son was trying to teach a line of toy cars to cross a bridge built from building blocks. Elena crouched in the middle of the floor, a gentle conductor to a symphony of small hands and big imaginations. He felt a dozen presumptions he had worn for years reel and tilt. He had expected to find a house that pulsed with the formality of his money, scheduled nap times, synchronized feeding routines, an army of aides. Instead he found improvisation, tenderness, and an unembarrassed simplicity that had not been part of his life in a long time. Elena looked up only when the son shook his toy and announced a rule the way small kings make laws. She flicked a glance toward the doorway and then, with a small, private smile, set down the string of yarn she had been braiding. The billionaire cleared his throat. The sound was ordinary, not the stern bark that usually organized his staff, but something reduced by the intimacy of domesticity. The maid's smile became steadier. The children turned. For a heartbeat he expected them to freeze with the trained reflex of little ones who had practiced smiles. Instead his daughter launched at him with the full force of joy that only children have when they find someone who belongs to them where they waited. She collided into his knees, leaving a smudge of glitter on his cuff. His son followed with a toothy grin, holding up a crooked bridge as if he had personally engineered something of global importance. The billionaire's throat tightened. He had missed a recital, a soccer match, a first stumble of speech, and somehow the ledger of triage he kept for his life was thin in the places where these moments lived. Elena watched him as if she read the regret on his face like a familiar letter. She moved to the kettle on a small side table and poured 2 cups of milk, leaving one with a straw and tiny sailor flags pushed into the foam. She had a way of making even a small thing feel ceremonious. Over the next hour he learned the map of what had been happening in his house without his knowledge. Elena had not only kept the children fed and safe, she had started an afternoon program for them when their mother's commitments ran long. She read to them from battered library books, improvised art projects from recycling, and to the billionaire's surprise, tested their small hands on numbers and letters with the patience of an old teacher. "You taught them to read?" he asked because he wanted the detail to settle, to be able to believe it. Elena shrugged, a quick motion like someone who has no stories to trade for attention. "I help where I can," she said. Her voice was soft, everyday, without the edges that his world had gilded into people. "They like stories. They like to build. They ask a lot of questions." He watched as she guided his son through drawing a map of the house, encouraging precision in small hand movements by the kind of simple praise he had never thought to distribute. The children lit up at each victory. The billionaire had to remind himself that the person leading this warm, unruly tribe was the woman he had signed checks to every month, the woman he had never thought to notice beyond the categories of employment. There were tensions too. He was used to control, the domain of a home that often reflected the architecture of his decisions. His wife traveled. His days were negotiations and margins. He had assumed that the children would be raised in an environment trimmed to his schedule, a place where every minute had a ledger entry. Elena's approach was messier. She let them stay up late when a story demanded it. She allowed extra helpings of dessert on days when the sun came loud through the conservatory. "Do you think I'm a bad father?" he asked at one point because the thought had been an ache and embarrassment all at once. Elena looked at him without flinching. You come when you can, she said. They know you. They told me about the time you built a fort out of boxes in the garage. They like that story. Her answer was not meant to be comfort exactly, but it landed as mercy. The billionaire sat on the floor between the scattered toys and listened as his children performed a puppet show that retold a story Elena had told them earlier about a little sparrow who found courage after losing his way. The puppets were kitchen spoons with stickers for faces. The moral was earnest: small things can be brave. After the puppet show, while the children folded themselves into a pile of sleepy limbs, the billionaire followed Elena into the kitchen. The house exhaled around them. He realized his watches were in his pocket and his inbox was forgotten. Why do you do all this? He asked because it seemed like the simplest question under the ceiling of domesticity. She dried a spoon with a cloth that had been frayed from decades of use. When I was little, my mother worked many jobs, she said without preamble. We had very little. But we had stories and patience and people who took their time. I wanted to give the children something like that. These children remind me to be near the things I missed when I was young. I had a boy once. He is grown now, far away. Her words arrived like a small, steady light. He thought of his own mother, the woman who had taught his first numbers and packed sandwiches into stiff paper with slices of care. He thought of his own mistakes in trying to replace presents with provision. You deserve better pay, he said abruptly, because the currency of his world felt suddenly insufficient. Elena shook her head, a wry half-smile. I do fine, she said. Money is useful. But it does not buy the hours. He remembered then the late-night emails he sent asking whether the nanny had prepared the twins' meals or whether a tutor had started. He imagined contracts and schedules that had tried to replicate affection with logistics. Here, in the soft clutter, he saw the difference between transaction and gift. In the weeks that followed, he came home more often without announcing himself. At first it was curiosity that led him back. He wanted to see whether the scene he had stumbled into was an anomaly or if Elena's quiet curriculum had become a practice. Each time he watched little rituals that had nothing to do with the spreadsheets that organized his life. How Elena showed his daughter how to stitch a button without a machine, how she taught his son a song about the moon that made him hush cleanly when the rain was on the roof. He began to take part. Not in grand gestures but in small ones. He learned how to cut a straight line in construction paper and hold crayons for his daughter. He sat through books he had never found time for and praised details of drawings he would otherwise have missed. He arranged for music lessons on Thursdays because Elena mentioned how the twins hummed the same sad tune when the rain was on the roof. He hired a tutor for math because his son loved patterns. His relationship with his wife when it came to parenting shifted too. She had been distant, not cruel but often pulling away into the demands of a life that required her to be elsewhere. Seeing him on the floor, glitter on his cuff and concentration in his jaw, changed a conversation that had been long dormant. She began to take lunches home sometimes, to sit in the chaos and notice the small progress of the children. It was messy. It was human. And Elena remained part of it, though the shape of her role changed. He offered to raise her salary and to find her better housing if she ever needed it. He offered, in a businesslike voice that still felt clumsy in domesticity, to help with her son's education and to guarantee her a future she had not been able to plan. She accepted some things with a simple grace and declined others with the same quiet firmness she had used on the day he arrived unannounced. The children noticed and adapted. They did not measure him by how many deals he closed but by how he read the same page twice when the first reading left them puzzled. He became a part of the afternoon ritual, a reluctant member at first and then, over time, a steady hand who would sometimes suggest a new game or build a bridge with more patience than he had imagined endurance for. Once, when the twins were older, their school announced a performance. He went, of course, and watched them on a stage lit by fluorescent lights. The son spoke a small line about courage and the daughter sang a clumsy verse of the moon song Elena had taught. He sat there with his fingers intertwined and, at the edge of the crowd, Elena watched too, her face a composition of pride and the private satisfaction of something that had been nourished and had grown. After the curtain fell, his daughter ran to him with a paper crown and threw it over his head with a flourish. The glitter dusted his hair like a small constellation. His son raced to his side, breathless with the joy of accomplishment. Elena lingered at the doorway, smiling the way someone smiles when they have helped a garden to grow. The billionaire thought about everything he had brought into the house before. Furniture that cost more than some families would make in a year, a security system that was a maze of algorithms, and a calendar so dense it felt like armor. He thought how all of it was less a measure of his life than the simple fact that he had chosen at last to be present. He could trace the pivot to the day he had come home without notice and found a room full of glitter and cardboard forts. That day had been a mirror, it had told him who he was and who he could be. Elena had not set out to rescue him or to judge him. She had simply done what people with care do, fill the spaces others leave empty. Years later, when he told the story to a friend, he would laugh softly and admit that he had been rescued by a woman who knew how to braid yarn and sing a song about the moon. He would say that money had given him many things, but it had not taught him to stay. That lesson, he added, had been worth more than every account in his bank. As the children grew, the house kept the marks of those afternoons. Glue hardened into table corners, a mural in the playroom that had been painted in summer bursts, a shelf where a row of homemade puppets rested like veterans of 1,000 battles. Elena moved on eventually, as people do, to a life that needed her somewhere else, but not before those twins had learned what it meant to be listened to. On her last day, she took them to the park for ice cream. The daughter hugged her and whispered into her ear, the kind of hush that trusts entirely. The son presented her with a map he had drawn, a map of the house, of the garden, of the ways to find courage, and wrote on the back a small note that said simply, "Thank you for the moon song." The billionaire watched them go, feeling a low and full gratitude. He realized that wealth had done its part when it removed excuses. It had allowed him to keep his promise when he finally decided to. He never stopped coming home without notice sometimes, and he never stopped paying attention to the small practices that make a life. He kept a jar of glitter on a shelf and a box of yarn in the kitchen. When he was very old, he would tell his grandchildren about a woman named Elena who taught 2 small children to be brave with toy puppets and the patience of a steady song. He would tell them how a house was transformed not by the grandest furniture but by a dozen afternoons where someone stayed. He learned that presence was the truest inheritance of all. He told tales